Imagine signing a commercial lease where the landlord is legally allowed to just change the definition of a square foot every single quarter entirely without warning you.
Right. You'd never do it.
Exactly. I mean, you would never sign it. Your legal team would basically throw it right out of the room. But if you are a CFO or, a finance leader, your company signs that exact type of contract every single day with your freight carriers.
Yeah.
Suddenly, your office space hasn't changed at all. You have the exact same footprint, but your rent bill has skyrocketed, and nobody can figure out why.
That analogy, I mean, it really hits the nail on the head because the dimensions of the agreement are constantly shifting right beneath your feet.
Yeah.
And for an executive team that prides itself on precision, the realization that millions of dollars are just drifting out the door through these invisible contractual trapdoors, it's usually a very rude awakening.
It really is. So welcome to this custom deep dive. Today we are speaking directly to you, the CFOs, the VPs of finance, the directors who are mapping out the margins.
The ones actually holding the purse strings.
Exactly. We are setting the usual supply chain jargon aside today and looking at this purely through the lens of financial control and margin recovery. Our mission today is to uncover exactly how money is leaking out of your transportation spend, why your standard ERP controls are, frankly, completely missing it, and why fixing this is the bottom line equivalent of a massive revenue windfall.
Yeah, and we are grounding this analysis in two incredibly revealing sources today. The first is an analytical piece by Oliver Nodjoumi from the Logistics Strategies newsletter. It's titled, Why Your Freight Costs Are Probably Higher Than You Think, and it was published in August 2026.
Great piece.
It really is. And the second source is the CFO Playbook for Transportation Cost Control by ICC Logistics Services. Together, they outline this structural blind spot that exists in almost every enterprise.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand how this money is leaking, we first have to understand why transportation spend behaves so differently from practically every other major expense category on your P&L. I mean, if you think about payroll or real estate or software licenses, those are relatively static, or at least, they are predictable based on market-posted prices.
Yeah, whereas transportation spend, on the other hand, is basically a shapeshifter.
Yeah.
Unlike labor or real estate, freight does not have a market-posted price. It is negotiated. And because it's negotiated, the rate you are paying today is entirely a function of when you last sat down at the table, what data you happen to have at that exact moment, and this is key, whether the business you are running today still looks anything like the business you were running when the ink dried on that contract.
And let's be honest, in today's environment, a business rarely looks the same 18 months later.
Exactly.
Your product mix changes, your shipping zones shift, your volume fluctuates, but the contract just remains frozen in time. I do want to dig into the mechanics of this, though, because for a lot of finance leaders who just, see the final freight bill total, the actual pricing mechanics inside these contracts look like a black box. What makes it so volatile?
The volatility really comes from compounding complexity. You aren't just dealing with a flat rate to move a box from point A to point B. You have dimensional weight rules, fuel surcharge indices, accessorial fees, zone structures, and they all move independently.
Let's pause there and explain dimensional weight for the finance listeners, because I think it perfectly illustrates your earlier point about the shifting square foot.
Oh, for sure.
How does that actually work in practice?
Okay, so imagine you ship large, lightweight items, say custom pillows. Carriers do not want a truck full of pillows because it fills up the physical volume of the trailer without generating much weight-based revenue.
Right. They're losing out on the space.
Exactly. So they use a formula, length times width times height, divided by a dimensional divisor. That gives them a dimensional weight, and they charge you for whichever is higher, the actual physical weight or the dimensional weight.
Makes sense.
Now, here is where the lease analogy comes in. Carriers will quietly change that divisor in a new contract, or maybe just via an annual update. If your divisor drops from, say, 139 to 115, the build weight of your pillows suddenly spikes, even though the physical box hasn't changed by a single millimeter.
Wow. Which means your shipping costs just went up 15 or 20% overnight, and you didn't even notice because the rate per pound on your contract looks exactly the same.
What's fascinating here is that none of these individual small changes are large enough to trigger your standard financial controls. But when they compound against each other, they quietly add hundreds of thousands of dollars to an annual spend line.
Right.
Our sources actually give a highly specific example of this happening with accessorial fees. On July 22, 2026, FedEx published its 2026 peak season surcharge schedule. The flat residential demand surcharge jumped to 80 cents per package.
Just 80 cents.
Just 80 cents. But that was a 23% increase from the previous 65 cents, and it hit every single parcel moving through the holiday window from late October all the way through mid-January 2027.
I mean, 15 cents sounds like absolute statistical noise. If you're looking at a macro-level budget variance report, 15 cents doesn't even register on the radar.
No.
But if you multiply that across an entire peak holiday volume, and then you stack it on top of the general rate increases that carriers always announce.
The math changes incredibly fast. Both national carriers might announce a standard 5.9% general rate increase. And that's the nice, clean number the finance team puts in the budget forecast.
Right.
But once you factor in those revised dimensional rules, the handling surcharges, and the residential fees, the true effective increase usually lands closer to 8 or even 12%.
Which naturally brings us to the structural root of the problem. If the underlying mechanics are this volatile and the carriers are constantly pulling these tiny levers, who in the organization is actually watching the till?
That leads to the ownership gap. This is where the issue transitions from being a carrier strategy problem to an internal organizational vulnerability. Yep. In almost every corporate environment, there is a massive void when it comes to who actually owns this spend end-to-end.
Yeah, if you ask around most organizations, it feels incredibly fragmented. Operations handles the day-to-day carrier relationships. I mean, their goal is just to make sure the boxes actually get on the trucks and reach the customer on time.
Right, they just want things moving.
Exactly. Then finance handles the high-level budget allocation and pays the bills. And procurement. They handled the last contract negotiation 18 months ago, patted themselves on the back for a job well done, and moved on to negotiating IT services.
So the punchline is, nobody owns the billing end-to-end. Operations is looking at service levels, procurement is looking at the signed contract, and finance is looking at macro budget actuals.
Right.
Nobody is continuously benchmarking the daily rates against current market data. And nobody is systematically capturing things like late delivery refund credits, which can add up to a massive sum in a complex carrier network.
But wait, I want to make sure I'm understanding this from the perspective of a CFO who's relying on their tech stack. I have to push back here.
Sure.
Isn't that precisely what an enterprise ERP system or a standard budgeting process is built to catch? If my freight cost suddenly jumped 12% instead of the forecasted 5.9%, why doesn't my budget to actual variance report set off massive alarm bells?
It's a totally fair assumption, but this is fundamentally a financial visibility problem, not a software problem. Your ERP is only as good as the parameters it is given to measure.
Okay.
Let's walk through the actual accounting mechanism of a misbilled invoice. An invoice comes in, the ERP checks to see if the shipment occurred, it matches the PO, and it sees that the total falls within a generally acceptable tolerance level for your current shipping volume.
So it just absorbs it as a cost of doing business.
Precisely. Or even more commonly, it gets vaguely attributed to volume growth or inflation.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say your overall revenue is up 10% this quarter, meaning you shipped more products.
Right. Business is good.
The ERP and the finance team, looking at the dashboard, expects freight costs to rise alongside revenue. They see the variance and assume the increase is entirely due to shipping more boxes.
I see.
They lack the granular invoice-level visibility to see that the cost per individual shipment has drifted out of alignment because, say, an accessorial fee quietly expanded from 18% to 31% of your total spend. The structural margin erosion is completely masked by your operational growth.
Okay, so the standard controls fail because the system is looking at the macro volume of the forest, completely blind to the fact that money is being extracted leaf by leaf.
Exactly.
So what happens when a company finally stops relying on that high-level ERP variance report and applies a rigorous, structured financial review to this specific category?
The results are almost always shocking to the internal teams, especially those who felt really confident in their negotiated rates. The sources point out that billing discrepancies are not edge cases. They are the absolute norm. And they happen via automated scanners and complex billing algorithms that just misapply the rules of your own contract.
Here's where it gets really interesting. There is an example in the sources of an enterprise parcel shipper that had just executed a brand new carrier contract. The ink was barely dry, but they noticed costs were climbing even though their operational volume hadn't changed at all.
Yeah, huge red flag.
So they brought in an independent structured review, And in just 5 months, under the brand new agreement, a systematic audit found $121,000 in recoverable billing discrepancies.
And that highlights a crucial mechanism. The contract itself was perfectly fine, the procurement negotiation was technically a success, but the execution, the automated billing generated by the carrier's systems, was simply wrong.
Just wrong.
Automated scanners were misreading package dimensions, kicking shipments into higher, more expensive pricing tiers. The carrier was misapplying the discount logic, and because the shipper's ERP just saw a valid shipping charge attached to a real tracking number, it blindly auto-paid it.
Which means the first line of defense isn't negotiating a better deal, it's simply making sure you aren't being overcharged on the deal you already have.
That is the foundation. A structured review has to move through 4 layers of control, and that first layer is billing accuracy. Even the most ironclad carrier contract is useless if you aren't rigorously validating the daily invoices to catch duplicate charges, misapplied fees, and those dimensional scanning errors.
But let's say you fix the billing. You are paying exactly what the contract says you should pay. Does that mean the leakage stops?
Not if your business has evolved. That brings you to the second layer of control, which is contract alignment. Remember how we talked about the business changing over 18 months?
Yeah, the product mix changes.
Right. If you negotiated a stellar contract back when you primarily ship heavy pallets business to business, but your strategy shifted, and now you ship a massive volume of lightweight parcels directly to consumers, your contract is completely misaligned.
Oh, that makes sense.
Your discount tiers are optimized for a business you no longer run. You are paying premium rates for your new parcel volume because the contract hasn't adapted to your current reality.
So you fix the billing and you align the contract to your actual shipping profile. At that point, you must be fully optimized, right?
Only if you assume the rates you negotiated were competitive to begin with, which leads to a massive realization for most companies, highlighted by another example in our sources.
Oh, the equipment manufacturer.
Yes, there was a commercial equipment manufacturer with about $24 million in annual transportation spend. The leadership had a gut feeling that their costs were uncompetitive, even though they had run a standard procurement process.
So they initiated a structured review grounded in independent market benchmarking.
They did. And by relying on independent data, rather than just asking their carrier for a better discount, they delivered $6.65 million in validated savings in year 1.
That's insane.
It is. That is a 28% reduction in their freight costs. Over 3 years, that compounded to nearly $11 million in savings, and they achieved it with zero disruption to their actual shipping service.
A 28% reduction on a $24 million spend. That is a staggering amount of money just sitting on the table. How is a gap that massive completely invisible to the internal procurement team?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it comes down to the third layer of control, which is market truth. When an internal procurement team enters a carrier negotiation without independent benchmarking data, they are essentially negotiating blindfolded.
Yeah.
They only know their own historical data and whatever the carrier's sales rep chooses to share with them.
And they know they spent $24 million last year and they just want to spend less this year.
That's the trap. You only ever secure what the carrier is willing to offer you in that room. You never secure what the broader market dictates you should be paying.
Right, because you don't have the data.
Internal teams simply do not have access to the cross-industry data warehouses required to know what a comparable shipper, someone with your exact same weight breaks, zone profiles, and volume, is paying in the market right now. Without that independent market truth, you don't actually have negotiation leverage.
Which flows perfectly into the fourth and final layer of control mentioned in the playbook. Strategic leverage, or carrier design.
Exactly.
If you only ever use one national carrier, you have zero operational leverage. You are captive to their rate increases. But the market has expanded with incredible regional carriers and specific mode optimization strategies. Evaluating those alternatives and diversifying your carrier base isn't just a logistics tactic, it is a crucial financial control to mitigate risk.
Taking control of those 4 layers, billing accuracy, contract alignment, market truth, and strategic leverage, is how a finance team finally stops the leakage.
We've established that the underlying mechanics of this spend are volatile, the internal ownership is fractured across departments, and the resulting leakage is incredibly real and measurable. But I want to pivot to the mindset of the finance leader listening right now. If you are a CFO, you are currently juggling 100 different macroeconomic fires. You have inflation, interest rates, escalating labor costs. Why should recovering this specific freight leakage jump to the very top of your priority list today?
Because of the revenue equivalency principle. This is the financial math that elevates transportation spend from a frustrating operational headache to a board-level strategic priority.
Wait, I want to make sure I'm understanding this revenue equivalency idea correctly. If transportation is categorized as an operating expense, doesn't that mean every single dollar saved bypasses the usual friction of generating new business?
It's remarkably elegant in its simplicity. When your sales team wins a new dollar of revenue, you have to pay to manufacture the product, which is your cost of goods sold, or COGS.
Right.
You also have to pay the sales commission, the marketing budget, and the administrative overhead, which is your SG&A. By the time that new dollar of revenue trickles down through all those expenses, only a tiny fraction of it actually reaches your operating profit.
But freight savings bypass all of that.
Completely.
Yeah.
When you save a dollar in transportation costs, there is no cost of goods sold attached to it. There is no SG&A. It flows directly, without any friction whatsoever, to your bottom line. It is pure margin recovery.
So what does this all mean? Let's work through the math using the numbers from the playbook.
Sure.
Let's say your company operates at a 10% net margin. Because of that direct flow-through we just talked about, every single $1 you recover in leaked freight costs is the bottom line profit equivalent of your sales team generating $10 in brand new revenue.
Yeah, and let's scale that up to a very standard scenario detailed in the sources. Imagine a company with a tighter 6% net margin. They have a $5 million annual transportation spend.
Okay.
An independent structured review uncovers a typical leakage profile, maybe around 12%, across billing errors and misaligned contracts. That equals about $620,000 in identified financial exposure.
Okay, so recovering that $620,000 in leaked freight costs at a 6% margin is the exact financial equivalent of your sales team going out and winning over $10 million in incremental new revenue.
Exactly.
$10 million. Think about the resources, the marketing spend, the new headcount, the massive, exhausting effort an organization would happily deploy to chase a $10 million revenue target.
The irony is almost painful. Organizations will grind themselves to the bone chasing that new top-line revenue while completely ignoring the equivalent profit that is already sitting right there, compounding silently inside their own freight bills.
It's wild.
Is profit your company has already earned? You are just systematically handing it back to the carriers because nobody is looking closely enough at the invoices.
This is exactly why the CFO has to step in and take ownership of this review. In a lot of organizations, the finance leader hesitates to aggressively audit transportation spend because they don't want to step on the toes of the operations or supply chain teams who manage those carrier relationships day to day.
Right, it can be censored.
They don't want to walk into the warehouse and signal distrust. Nobody wants to have a conversation that implies, hey, you're doing a bad job managing this.
But framing it as an operational critique is the wrong approach entirely. Operations is doing their job. They are moving the freight. The CFO must frame this as a financial control discipline.
I like that.
It is about exercising sound financial stewardship over the company's margins. The message to the wider team isn't, operations, you are failing. The message is, we need to ensure we have the exact same level of rigorous financial visibility and control around our logistics costs that we mandate for payroll, software, and every other major cost center in this business.
It's about bringing the data out of the shadows. Bringing in an independent review provides a neutral ground. The findings belong to the whole organization, not just one department. And the CFO who initiates that review is simply doing their core job, protecting the P&L from structural erosion.
And importantly, doing it without disrupting the vital operational relationships the supply chain team has built with those carriers. A data-driven renegotiation based on independent benchmarks is collaborative. It's not confrontational.
Right.
You aren't banging your fist on the table demanding an arbitrary discount. You are simply presenting undeniable market facts.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today. From the compounding, shape-shifting mechanics of dimensional weight divisors and residential surcharges to the ownership gap between finance, procurement, and operations.
A lot of hidden traps.
We walked through how a $121,000 billing error can quietly bypass your ERP, and we did the revenue equivalency math that proves why a dollar saved in freight is the most valuable dollar in your entire business.
Absolutely.
For the finance leaders listening who are nodding along right now, the ones who recognize that ownership gap in their own organization, who realize their carrier contracts haven't been independently benchmarked against the broader market in years, we have a very specific next step for you.
And to be clear, The next step isn't about rushing into a chaotic renegotiation with your carrier tomorrow. It's about gaining visibility first. You have to map the exposure.
To map where this drift is hiding in your own P&L, you need the right framework. We highly recommend downloading the free companion resource to today's deep dive. It is the CFO Playbook for Transportation Cost Control, published by ICC Logistics
That's a
Services.
great read.
It is built specifically for finance leaders, not logistics teams, to help you safely and systematically identify this margin exposure across those 4 layers of control. There is no sales pitch, no hype, and absolutely no form to fill out. You can download the guide instantly with zero commitment at ikelogistics.com. That is ikelogistics.com.
This raises an important question for you to take back to your executive teams today. If a highly digitized, deeply data-heavy process like freight billing can harbor such massive, compounding, invisible margin erosion simply because no single department fully owns the invoice end-to-end? Wait, let me rephrase. What other negotiated, structurally complex line items on your P&L are quietly eroding your margins right now for the exact same reason?
You might be able to recite your total spend to the exact dollar, but the real question is, do you know what that dollar is actually buying you? Your ERP might be giving you a perfectly crisp image of your macro budget variance, but when it comes to the complex shifting reality of negotiated freight spend, it is missing the structural fractures completely. It is time to demand a better look.